Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night to you lovely folks joining me here nice and early over at Marvel's Snap Zone. Welcome back for another weekly tier list segment. This week, however, things are just a little bit different. Of course, we are on the very edge of a brand new patch where we're expecting some very large balance changes and, of course, a chunk of new cards with the release of the Token Shop, Series 4 and Series 5 of cards. Players are very excited, and as a result, we don't think there is too much of a point of putting out a dedicated tier list this week. There's no real point in talking about the best decks in Marvel Snap right now, given they are all about to be flipped on their head by a brand new release and a brand new balance patch. As a result, this week's tier list is going to look at the Token Shop, and what we're going to look to do for you this week is talk to you about, hey, in our opinion, what do we think you should be locking in the Token Shop, depending on what your goals are when it comes to Marvel Snap. Now, this is very much going to be a preface before we get started with this. This is a very heavy opinion piece. No one can be sure just how much impact any card is going to have on the metagame. Card games have a lot of moving pieces, and what's popular can definitely dictate what is strong. Cards can go from useless 1 minute to core staples the next, and we consider what potential they have and try and use this to inform our decisions in this piece. So for Series 4 and Series 5, we're here to provide a potential score for every card. That score is going to be based on the current and future potential of that card. To create that score, we've used a very scientific approach of listing out ideas of how we're going to use them, and then considering the impact and power that those cards will have based on those interactions. We then also considered some potential strength of the card just by itself. So there will be no particular order with these. We're going to start by walking through you lovely ladies and gents who still find yourself in series number 3. If you guys are going to be looking for deck lists for series 4 and 5, there will be an article linked in the description box below for you, and also some videos on the channel already, if that's what you're looking for. But for you folks that find yourself in series 3, there's a debate going on right now of whether or not you should be saving your collector's tokens to buy Series 4 and 5 cards, because they are going to be much rarer, much harder to find, and of course you will eventually get your Series 3 cards, right? You're still working your way up the collection level, so it might be a bit of a waste to burn your tokens on cards you are guaranteed to get sooner. We think this is an interesting thought process, but for the most part, this is going to be a personal choice, and I wouldn't listen to anybody who's telling you that, hey, what you want to do is wrong. I think if all you care about is EV, or, in parenthesis, then yes, save those collector's tokens for Series 4 and Series 5 cards. They're going to be harder to crack. You're going to wish that you had them later on. It makes sense to pin those in your shop and make sure you're buying them when you get the chance. That being said, there is an overwhelming number of players out there who are looking for 1 or 2 cards to put together their favourite decks or their favourite archetypes in the game. As a result, this is very much going to be a general, hey, if you're not sure which Series 3 cards you should prioritise these ones. If you have some in mind for a deck you love already, there is absolutely nothing wrong with pinning that to your shop and making sure you buy it as soon as possible. So please do keep that in mind. With all that being said, these are the 5 cards that we firmly believe, if you're looking to maximise value by picking up Series 3 cards and cards you will just play with the most, you should look to explore. Up first, we have Serra. Serra is commonly believed to be the most powerful card in Marvel Snap at time of release. This isn't shocking to many people, as cost reduction mechanics are often one of the more powerful and dangerous things you can do in card games. When cards are balanced on when or how you're allowed to play them, Serra allows for turn 6 plays that simply aren't possible without her. Some of the examples of this are things such as Iron Man alongside Mystique, or several like Aero plus Death plays that don't require wave. Or simply she can be used to, hide a very large amount of stats from your opponent until it's far too late for them to retreat by having a monumental turn 6. Serra has always remained one of the kingpins of Marvel Snap, and it will be interesting to see if they can maintain their stranglehold moving forward, but unless they are addressed in a balance change at the same time as Series 4 and 5 are released, we firmly suggest picking her up if you are given the chance. Wong is another one of those cards commonly believed to be one of the more powerful cards in Marvel Snap, albeit slightly easier to counter with popular anti-meta choices. In my opinion, he's one of the more fun cards that Snap has to offer, and rightfully earns a place at the top of this list as well. Commonly found doubling the effects of powerful on-reveal cards such as Ironheart, White Tiger, or even things like Black Panther, Wong just turbocharges things like on reveal and discard synergies too. He even enables an Exodia style combo deck alongside Mystique, Onslaught and Gambit, another deck that maybe gets even more toys from Series 4 and 5 in the form of Luke Cage and Hazmat. Turn 4 is often a big setup turn for a lot of these decks based around having large unmatched turn 6s, and Wong slots perfectly into all of those expected deck builds. Wave might be a slightly more contentious choice, and a card begrudged by those who didn't have access to it in the first ever Season Pass that was offered during beta. Now, however, they've been available in the Pool 3 progression for quite a while, but Wave is another card that fundamentally reduces the cost of cards, turning them into unexpected powerhouses, letting you play them in spots where you shouldn't be able to play them, a very, very powerful mechanic indeed. Wave can also be used in combination with cards like Odin in order to soft lock your opponent from playing multiple cards in those final few turns, or simply turn off big explosive turn 6s from decks like Serra. This makes Wave a powerhouse and can be used in everything from ramped strategies to just an anti-meta tool for what you expect to see from your opponent, and you should definitely consider picking her up when you get the chance if possible. Mystique is one of the more unique effects that Marvel Snap has to offer, and a card that was begrudgingly very late in Den's collection over here at Marvel Snap Zone. It's a very powerful tool for a number of top strategies. Things like Mr. Negative or Patriot will commonly use this card to gain extra copies of their most powerful effects, giving you more anthems or more powerful late game tools. Mystique just offers an effect that no other card in Marvel Snap does, and it's one that sees quite a lot of play and is very flexible in a number of different shells. For that reason, we think it should be one of the 5 cards you should consider pinning to your store if you get the opportunity to in the near future. Last but not least, from series number 3, another potentially contentious choice, Destroyer is a card that is kind of the linchpin of one of the more powerful and consistent archetypes Marvel Snap has to offer in the ongoing Destroyer and regular Destroyer decks that you see on the ladder all the time. As a result, we think this is a card that's worth highlighting in particular. That deck, for the most part, doesn't contain very many other Pool 3 cards, if any, depending on the list that you may be looking at. And as a result, if you're finding yourself early in your journey in Pool number 3, Destroyer can be a fantastic card to pin to the shop in order to give yourself a very powerful top tier deck to continue climbing the Marvel Snap ladder. For that reason, and for that reason alone, we think Destroyer deserves to be one of our top 5 Series 3 cards you should consider pinning to the shop. Okay, moving on to the cards in series number 4. These ones, of course, perhaps a little bit more contentious, and you need to remember, of course, we are giving these ratings before anyone has played a single game with these cards. These are potential ratings to try and inform your decision about which cards you prioritize. Again, no one can be sure about the appropriate power level of these cards over time, so please do keep that in mind. And once again, if you do want to grab a card just because it's your personal favourite and you want to build around it, I would encourage you to do so over prioritizing anything about rarity or power level. So starting with series number 4, we're actually going to look at what I think is the best card, maybe the second best card, for potential in series 4 in Titania. This card, if you're not familiar, when played at any location, when at any location, if another card is played at the location on either side, it will switch sides to and from yourself and your opponent. This is a very unique and very powerful effect, and 5 power for 1 energy is an unreal rate on stats. As a result, we think the potential of this card is absolutely insane, and we are going to find out soon. As a baseline, this effect appears to be a negative overall, but it is very much in the user's control and becomes a mind-bending puzzle. The power is very high, the energy cost is low, and that is a recipe for success in Marvel Snap. She can be swapped back and forth pretty freely in almost any deck. For example, you can drop her on turn 4 into a lane where your opponent already has 3 cards. This fills the lane. She will stay there, and on 6 you can play a card in the lane, she'll jump back to you and be a 5-point swing on top of whatever card you play. That's a potential 10-point play for just 1 energy. She might even be the final piece in a full negatives effect style archetype. Another card on this list is also ready to fit into that archetype as well, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. As when you're playing a card like Zero, you want many targets for it, which makes the value of a card like Titania even higher. Thus, you can negate effects like this without impacting your other cards. For example, Zero and Titania on 2, followed by Venom, is going to be a very, very powerful play pattern. She's also just playable as your very last card as a 1 energy card with 5 power. In junk decks, Debris can fill up a lane, following itself up with Titania. Really simple, it can no longer move over to your opponent's side of the field. Junk decks can often also struggle with a final power push, and she fits really nicely with some 5-drops such as Spider-Woman on the final turns to swing those games. This is in addition to any deck use that applies here also. As a result, Titania's potential score in our opinion is a solid 10 out of 10. We find it hard to believe a card that has so many corner case uses does not eventually find one, if not several consistent homes. It appears very well placed entering into the game and could even get better with age. Next, we'll take a look at She-Hulk. She-Hulk could be very consistent. If you're not familiar with this card, it's a 6-cost, 10-power card that will cost you 1 less for every unspent energy on the last turn before you play it. There are many turns in Marvel Snap where skipping a turn and next turn playing a reduced 10-power card could very well be worth it. This is without the very obvious synergy with a card like Wave. However, she does need to be played into, and if hyper-efficient decks are using all their energy every turn, and those are the dominant force in the metagame, she will of course lose some value. Playing Wave on turn 5, you will make this cost 0 on turn 6. Death can also cost 0 as well. Playing Death, She-Hulk and Arrow on turn 6 seems almost unbeatable if the cards land in order, which they will very often, as you only need to destroy 2 cards to make that happen. This alone is worth a high potential score. Also, what if we build a Zoo deck with She-Hulk? Skipping turn 3 is the earliest she can be dropped. In the worst case scenario, she's stronger than America Chavez on turn 6. Also, if we miss on Blue Marvel and don't use 5 energy on turn 5, she's just a cheaper Chavez, which will allow us to play more of our hand on turn 6. The Wave interaction can actually be abused with more than just Death Wave. She is a potential additional power for control decks that want to play Wave to limit turn 6 plays of an opponent. Playing Wave on turn 5 and then She-Hulk and Leader on turn 6 is a truly terrifying prospect. This leads me to Hela. Hela decks can afford to have some other big enablers such as Jubilee. So what if we add Wave, use it as either the backup plan or a way to get Hela behind Invisible Woman earlier, and then just play She-Hulk as a discard target? Finally, there's Psylocke. Not the most exciting thing, but on 4, if you play Psylocke and skip turn 5, you can just play the Infernaut and She-Hulk on turn 6. That's a lot of power, and definitely shows you some potential that a card like this can have. For that reason, we're currently giving She-Hulk a potential score of 8 out of 10. She comes in with a lower score than Titania only because of the applications outside of the above and not necessarily apparent in the case of She-Hulk, where they very clearly are with Titania. It doesn't appear to have as much future potential. Still, she's a very powerful build-around and supports routes that lead to high scores already, meaning she's definitely a powerful card to keep your eyes on. Next, we'll take a look at Luke Cage. Stopping all your cards having their power reduced is a pretty great effect and is quite unique. The marks against Luke Cage are the lower power and potential requirement to be played early in the game in order to get access to this effect. This makes Luke Cage less flexible than he may seem on the surface. He's also got limited applications, to be honest, which is a bit of a shame. The effect is potentially very powerful though, so don't write it off just yet. The Hazmat deck has been around as a meme for a while. This definitely makes it a lot better. Being able to guarantee your power not being reduced should allow for more cards to be played throughout the game. However, the deck can be countered pretty easily and is very reliant on a few cards that all need to appear at a prompt manner. He's also a potential 2-drop maybe in the Spectrum lists. It appears like it might be outclassed by things like Colossus in this archetype, but it is an option depending on what the metagame may look like. If Negative Zone is a hot location, he becomes the highest win rate card for about 24 hours. Also, if you don't like that location, there you go, easy fix. Typhoid Mary's been mentioned also, but in reality I think this may not be worth it, as there are other ways to abuse Typhoid Mary more consistently. The current potential score here for Luke Cage is going to be a 5 out of 10. The ability has future potential. Going into the current meta, it has very limited applications and is probably outclassed in many cases. Its one true home maybe as a key piece of this combo deck, which can easily be countered by Cosmo, as the cards can't all be played in one turn. It is also its own counter, unfortunately. Similar to Daredevil, one Luke Cage will just turn off the other one. Up next, we're going to take a look at Absorbing Man. Absorbing Man, a 4-cost, 3-power card that simply says on reveal, if the last card you played has an on reveal ability, this card will copy it. This score is either going to be very wrong or very, very right. Duplicating on reveals may create combos, or more likely to just make the on reveal decks more consistent than they already are by giving them their own version of Mystique. Creative deck building can lead to some pretty nifty ideas, therefore its future potential is definitely very, very high. However, it's not quite as effective as Mystique as it costs 4 energy, but the sky is only up for our man here. Wong on 4, Serra on 5, Wolfsbane and Absorbing Man on 6 does seem to have potential as one potential example. Serra is also going to make Absorbing Man cost 3 on the last turn of the game, therefore this has potential to be the top end of a Serra list as well. Wong into White Tiger into Absorbing Man makes the on-reveal strategy more consistent, and that's before we consider all the crazy combos that may be pulled off by having an extra trigger. Odin, of course, is the king of on-reveals, has to feature also in this deck. Hitting Absorbing Man presumably will repeat the copied on-reveal. This may be abused or become more abusable in the future, and it also just adds consistency to the lines we've already talked about. You could also maybe look at something like Moon Knight to make more swarms before a Cerebro in Cerebro 3. Lockjaw, of course, is the high roll in this case. Wave into almost anything in your decks, things like Doctor Doom, White Tiger, into Absorbing Man. Really simple, powerful stuff. Also, excellent to be pulled out by Lockjaw, pulled out of Lockjaw by another on-reveal effect, such as Doctor Doom, pulling into Absorbing Man to make another Doctor Doom, which is a really sweet line if you ask me. As a result, our current potential score for Absorbing Man is going to be a solid 10 out of 10. The potential may or may not be realised on release, but over time it's likely to find many homes and could just make on-reveal decks way more consistent, which in itself is enough of a reason to give a nice high score. Up next, Maria Hill. This card may be getting overlooked. The baseline effect adds resources you can slot into the game. A random 1-cost card generated by this can be worth quite a bit. On the play, she adds a card to your hand and buffs the collector. It's quite an interesting play pattern you could find. It also adds 1-drop value that you can hopefully bounce again with a card like Beast or Falcon. She also adds power to the board while maintaining hand size. Therefore, pretty good with Devil Dinosaur. Potential line is, here is dropping Moon Girl for Maria and Agent Coulson, which is obviously coming up next, and relying on Devil Dino into Mystique as your final push. Maria and Coulson can definitely be played on turn 6 alongside that Mystique in that play pattern, which creates some very interesting final turn plays. Our potential score, however, on Mariah currently is just a 4 out of 10. She has 2 limited homes right now, and could be seen as a good value card in several other decks in the future. However, the ceiling is quite low on this one. It feels like it's a utility card at best and will be nice to try, but unlikely to have a seismic shift now or in the future. Up next, as promised, however, is Agent Coulson. If you're not familiar with this one, 3 cost, 4 power, add a random 4 cost and 5 cost card to your hand on reveal. This effect alone has plenty of potential. It's 2 buffs to the collector, 2 cards in hand for Devil Dinosaur, alongside something like Maria on that final turn of the game. But unlike Maria, there are a few other potential avenues too. There is some power in being able to guarantee you are curving out over the course of the game. Of course, Devil Dinosaur on 5 into Mystique and Agent Coulson on 6 is a pretty strong example of how he might fit into that existing shell. Finally, we might want to pair him with Nick Fury for the 6 drops. Alongside the other agents that are in Marvel Snap, a new way of deck building may one day finally get there, where you just cut the top end entirely, play Quinjet early game and use cards like Agent Coulson and White Queen to fill your curve as a guarantee. That's quite an exciting idea to explore and shows how this sort of effect can be looked at in a few different ways. Potential score on this one currently a 5 out of 10. Devil Dinosaur and the Collector may like this card, and it adds its potential to a random card deck in the future with things like White Queen and Nick Fury. Even if that materialised though, it would of course be rather inconsistent. Up next, the Helicarrier. It appears this card may be okay in Hela decks, but it is just as likely to clog up your hand as it is to help you out. However, thinking about it, this is another, handlock style card with the Collector, Devil Dinosaur, and Morbius. Considering we can expand this effect to other ideas such as this, maybe this has more long-term potential than it seems like it might do on the surface. I also think this card is potentially very powerful alongside things like Lockjaw. Pulling this out of the deck is going to be rather strong if you don't necessarily have any other better things to flip into play with 10 power. And if you happen to discard it by accident in Lockjaw Dracula, you're certainly not going to be complaining, assuming you can still get your endgame plans together. In relation to Hela, it is on rate. It adds cards to your hand, which may help ensure that you don't discard Hela, and may definitely add to the fun level of that deck. Otherwise, it doesn't seem like it's a particularly good fit. Much like Nick Fury, random doesn't help if you want to be discarding certain cards. Once upon a time, the discard decks with the Collector and Swarm were super strong, and it's very possible Helicarrier can help bring those back without Lockjaw. It appears unlikely, as the deck could be quite clunky and have a lot of fail states, but it's worth considering as an example. Colleen Wing, of course, hitting Swarm, and Lady Sif hitting Helicarrier, and Morbius and the Collector could get very, very large over the course of a game like that. Once again, play patterns like Devil Dinosaur into Mystique and Lady Sif on turn 6 do indeed create some very powerful endgames for an effect like this. Potential score on this one, currently a 5 out of 10. The ideas are there, but it seems more meme than dream. Over time, more handlock style cards might appear, which helps this reach a higher ceiling, but for now, the score is low, but perhaps not as low as you thought it might be. Speaking of low, M'Baku is the next card we're going to take a look at here in Series 4, and whether you want to pin this one to the shop, unfortunately this card is kind of terrible in its current version. It's either going to hit your hand with no way to put it back, or it's going to leap into the bar with no name at the end of a game and lose you that game. If there were more ways to keep it in the deck, or send it back other than Lockjaw, then maybe, but that's a pretty big maybe. M'Baku is, in our opinion, the first true disappointment of this list. With Lockjaw, sending it back into your deck and bringing back a card you actually want, it will still probably leap out into the negative zone and lose you a game. It's unlikely to get better with age and is a fringe piece of the current deck. It's not better than Wasp, Sunspot or Iceman in the deck that we think it might be good in. And for that reason, the score on this one is going to be a 2 out of 10. Attuma coming up for you next. Back on the hype train with this one. If you have another card here at the end of your turn, it destroys itself, but it does have a nice chunky 10 power. Attuma can be part of the Zero deck. It can even replace Typhoid Mary or Red Skull. Armor protects it from itself, and Professor X can curve into it, which is obviously a very, very strong play pattern as well. You will have to play around this effect for it to reach its full potential, but there are plenty of ways to do that. Playing Armor on turn 2, Attuma on turn 4, susceptible to Enchantress, but a pretty strong play line. It's also only 2 cards which fit into other strategies without taking up too much space. Professor X is the other end of it, playing Attuma into Professor X, locking down that lane and likely just winning it every time due to the amount of stats that you already have there. Attuma followed by Venom alone is also just 11 power without any downside. Potential score here, going to make this one a 7 out of 10. Definitely some strong options to abuse that high stat line, but it would perhaps like a few more ways to have raw power by itself in the future. Orka coming up for you. The bigger Namor, 5+ power if it's the only card here, starting at a base of 9. Namor has its uses, but it's never the standalone strongest card in a deck. On a lane by itself, though, this one is 14 power. Add Claw, and that's 20 power. Add Mr. Fantastic, and that's 22 power. Orka has potential, much like Namor does, which may be realised even if at the moment it's a little hard to see. Also, the baseline is still just an America Chavez, which makes it stronger than Namor as it could clutch in any lane without turning its effect on. Also, Green Goblin and Hobgoblin can end up on the other side of the board. Green Goblin's -3 followed by Orka as a +14 is a 17 power swing from 2 cards, which is going to be hard to overcome to win that lane. Maybe you just play this in a deck which focuses on 2 lanes as a potential Hail Mary on the 3rd lane. 14 power can definitely win many a lane in Marvel Snap all by itself, and as an okay standalone card which may end up being abusable in the future, we're going to give this one a potential score of 5 out of 10. That's going to be it for all the Series 4 cards coming to Marvel Snap in the first release, rated on their potential alone. If you think we've missed any ideas on these, which raise or lower the bar, please feel free to let us know down in the comments section below, over on Twitter at Marvel Snap Zone, or in our Discord server where you can come and chat shop with thousands of other Snap players. Looking forward to seeing what the community does with all of these, and revisiting just how wrong we were in a few weeks' time. If Series 5 cards are the thing you are interested in seeing and what you want to know if you should be pinning to your shop, well, here we go. Very much the same premise as before. No one can be sure how much of an impact these are going to have. This is very much a potential score, not a regimented stat. We do not have insider knowledge, so please don't act like we do. Alrighty, up first. Galactus, one of the big hitters many people are super excited about. The man from Tar finally arrives to eat some worlds and destroy some dreams in the hands of the player base. Galactus has been around since the start of the game as a random effect from cards such as Agent 13. At times, he's just felt like the generation low roll, but if you're like me and you've pulled out a Galactus victory, the potential is very apparent. If played earlier than turn 6 in a game, he completely flips the script of the game. As the player, you can pick which lane you're going for and negate everything your opponent did up until that point. Then you just need to beat your opponent in one lane over the course of the remaining turns. Sure, this effect can be countered. Goblins, rocks, even random squirrels, which, by the way, if that's intentional, is a fantastic flavor win, because once upon a time, Squirrel Girl did in fact beat Galactus. But a lot of games on turn 4, where we envision is the time Galactus hits the board if you're doing it the way that you want to do it, do have one open location, so it isn't that difficult to get it down, but you do have to keep these counters in mind. If it's everywhere, though, the answer exists. One final mark against Galactus is how telegraphed the play lines of decks playing into it heavily may well become. It might become a one-cube deck, as some people say, or your opponents may be able to start developing the location before you get into it, leaving you behind with little time to overcome their existing power level. Cheating Galactus out early is going to be the name of the game on this one. Then you want to follow it up with heavy hitters. Wave is at a premium as it guarantees Galactus on turn 4, but effects like Psylocke, Electro, or Mr. Negative might be powerful ways to gain an advantage as well. Also, Electro on a lane that's being destroyed by Galactus just gives you more energy to fill that lane up later, so that seems like a pretty great synergy. Death will be reduced in power for every card destroyed in neighbouring lanes. That has huge potential with Galactus, as this also allows for bigger turn 5s and turn 6s, which might result in you pushing more power than your opponent on raw stats alone. Pairing this with things like Wolverine and Sabretooth, which benefit from said destruction, also has some potential. On Wolverine, we could potentially try and buff Wolverine throughout the game, and when Galactus comes down, he'll leap to the same location. Things like Forge, Hulkbuster, Okoye, or even Shuri might achieve this. Added bonus of potentially buffing Galactus as well, meaning that less stats will be required in order for you to win. Also, Leader for a turn 6 finish, copying the exact cards your opponent plays, but leaving you ahead because of your 4-power leader, might also be another way to go. And then, of course, Mr. Negative's theme music. Couldn't we have a new super expensive deck with this and Super Skrull being inverted? Inverted Mr. Negative cards push a lot of power and may be the way to truly abuse Galactus. Inverting him and then on 5 blowing a lane up and following up with your inverted madness, while maybe a little inconsistent, seems exceptionally sweet. The potential court score for Galactus is going to be 8 out of 10. Galactus has potential to break the game with this effect, and has, with any card that can be countered, has the potential to be lower. If people are playing lots of Squirrel Girls and Goblins, this gets a lot harder to pull off. This one is going to be interesting to watch develop, but the card already has a very loyal fan base of players theory crafting around it, and that may be what eventually pushes it into the realms of broken. Up next, Valkyrie coming up as our next Series 5 card. Is it just me, or is Sunkeeper Tarim from Hearthstone a good card? This seems insane, with the potential to get better. The stat line fits right into Cerebro 3 as an obvious starting point. You'll then, set all the stats, and your opponent will be equal on that lane, and then Cerebro will buff all of your stuff to be over the top of your opponent's, but one use does not give a high potential score. Thankfully, Valkyrie is just a good card outside of that Cerebro application. If your opponent played Jubilee into the Infinite last turn, no, they played 2-3 power cards, I wouldn't worry about that. That's, that 15 power Venom over there that they wanted to copy on turn 6 with Taskmaster, 3 power, fantastic. Zoo decks often play a lot of low-powered cards, then buff them up. Valkyrie becomes a your side buff, and then Kazar pushes your cards over the top. Also, Valkyrie and Titania on turn 6 next to each other? Interesting stuff. This can be the biggest swing in the game, with potential to take a unit from over 20 power down to just 3. After a Serra, it costs 4, which can be played alongside Killmonger for a new finish in Serra control. It can turn off any large card played prior to turn 6 on priority or off priority, and sets a lane to equal one way or the other, and then can just win that lane by itself. If you and your opponent have 2 cards on a lane, Valkyrie is a win guaranteed. As a result, the potential score on Valkyrie here is a solid 10 out of 10. I would pin this one. We're pretty sure we're just scratching the surface. It's not the flashiest card you're ever going to see, but it's consistent and it's flexible and it should be high on your wish list, in our opinion. Super Skrull coming up for you next. Nice tech card. Unfortunately, though, it has limited proactive applications. This, of course, having all the ongoing effects of all your enemy cards. You play this on 4 and your opponent will know what ongoing effects they're going to be giving you and where. As a surprise final card, it's limited by the meta and potentially outclassed by things like Valkyrie and Leader in surprise swing potential. Inverted, however, from something like Mr. Negative, this stat line has a lot of potential and of course gets completely silly in the mirror or if copied by a Mystique. However, we're struggling to see this as anything more than a specific tech card and one that may not even get the job done. This one's quite decisive and you'll find views ranging from this being a please nerf already, this card is ridiculous card to we don't think this is particularly great. So we're going to have to wait and see how this one plays out and only speculate for now. As a result, the potential score on this is going to be a 6 out of 10. Not sure how this one pushes the needle in any significant way. Specific counters are okay, but when you really think about it, there are only very few ongoing effects you want to copy that might win you a game. It can get better with time through holding its potential score up slightly, but however, in this current metagame, where this might be good, does Rogue or Enchantress just do more of what you're looking to achieve? Up next, Shuri coming through, one that many players are very excited about, doubling the power of the next card you play. A lot of cards can do with twice as much power. At a baseline, this makes Shuri outperform her base stats consistently. However, as a tempo card, she seems a little bit underwhelming. She has to be played on 4 and just passes the benefit onto another card. So, although she's good, overall stats for cost, her potential, is only reached with specific combos, not by herself. One simple line, of course, is playing into Black Panther. Unlike the full Wong combo, this is significantly less counterable as a standalone activator. It also could allow for the rest of the deck to be more flexible as you're not preparing to be a Wong or bust kind of strategy. Then there are, of course, crazy full combos enabled by Wong. The math on these can take cards such as Wasp to astronomical numbers. And then, of course, there's Mr. Negative, which must be considered in any situation where we have a low-statted, high-energy card. She may have huge potential as an enabler now and into the future in that archetype. She certainly doesn't seem busted, but she could be a key enabler now and in the future. And, of course, Mr. Negative being the biggest send-off there. Double inverted Iron Man, yes please, that sounds fantastic. When discussing potential, the sky is the ceiling if we're looking at an inverted Shuri. When considering potential for any 4-power card, consider Sarah Abuse at some stage. As a 3-power card on turn 6, 3-cost card on turn 6, what could we also do alongside it? It might not be clear yet, but the potential is there. Maybe Shuri into Maximus or Colleen Wing on 6 is just strong enough to be an endgame plan for a deck with Sarah. Then, of course, the bonkers Wong combo routes are endless here. We're not going to try and outline them all, but things like Psylocke into Wong, into Shuri, into Black Panther, into Zola, into or Forge into Wong, into Shuri, into Odin, into Wasp. That this could definitely expand with time, and there are already many powerful play patterns there, giving this one a potential score of 8 out of 10. When we look at the current potential, might be a hot take, and her current spot doesn't seem super high. She has uses which can be abused, and so we definitely can't score it low. However, her future potential to remain, at least as a similar power level, if not broken, is high, pushing her into a higher potential score overall. Bast up next. This one deserves your attention. Nakia was once the most powerful card when it gave a hand-wide buff of +2 power, and this card is maybe better. There are 73 cards in this game that this currently represents a buff on. In addition, all those cards are lower in stats for a reason. It's also not a negative card to any deck which already has stuff that is 3 power. We could also accept losing a point of power on Khazar, for example, if we get to, have +1 or +2 power on 3 other cards. The only thing holding this card back is the requirement to fit into specific decks. But if the power level of those decks is much higher than everything else, it doesn't matter. Bast buffs almost every zoo card you'd want to play, including buffing things like Wolfsbane and Ant-Man. Khazar is the only negative in this case, which is minimal at best. America Chavez will help draw consistency, also allowing you to hit the good cards more often. It also gets buffed by Kazar afterwards. Mr. Negative traditionally plays low power level cards with high energy. Well, let's mitigate that downside by setting the cards we drew P-negative to 3 power. Bast sets Carnage to 3, the Hood to 3, Venom to 3. It may end up being more of a flood play style, but there are lines where this card just setting up those 3 cards to 3 has huge future potential. Certain tech cards which cost less than 3 to 3, so Cerebro can buff them as well if they, alongside the things you were already intending on playing. Consider Daredevil, Iron Man, Cerebro itself as 3 cost cards. We may be able to get more flexible with our Cerebro deck building. Maybe even a Cerebro 2 with this card can transform into a Cerebro 3 in a pinch. On the flip side, it could be used to reduce other cards to 3 so they fit into Cerebro 3 as well. Imagine a 3-power Serra followed by Cerebro, Mystique and Brood in the same turn. These may seem like they're off-the-wall suggestions, but it helps to demonstrate some of the full potential a card like this can have, which is why we're currently sticking it as a 9 out of 10. It's strong, yes, but it does have the downside of having to be built around. Zoo decks are going to love this one, and there are plenty of other ways to abuse this now and in the future, leading to a very high score overall. However, it's not the second coming of Nakia, as it's not quite as flexible or abusable as a full hand buff. It will, however, be frustrating and annoying to play against, and it will win games all by itself. It's going to feel strong to play and make for interesting games and decisions. Thanos coming up for you next, the big cheese himself. The reason we went with potential scores instead of measuring raw power is this card alone. This is the most unique card in Marvel Snap, and unlike Galactus, we have no idea how this is going to play out yet. Baseline though, shuffling 6 cards into your deck in Marvel Snap is bad. So before we look at the stones themselves, we have to start from this premise. That sucks. Looking at the stones, however, we have to draw them in a certain order, but if we do, they become much, much better. The Mind Stone draws you 2 stones, the Reality Stone draws a card, the Soul Stone draws a card, Space Stone draws a card, Time Stone draws a card, and then you consider the effects they all have on the board and the game state. They're all very powerful for 1 energy. The problem here, though, is they are 6 energy altogether and 6 board spaces. Only 2 of the stones add anything more than 1 power. And one of them is dependent on drawing and playing Thanos and all 5 of the other stones before it gives you any real ability. Any locations that limit board spaces or make playing into them bad for you are almost instant losses for this card. Not drawing the stones in a favourable order is possibly also an also loss, and Killmonger can destroy every stone, if that's the thing that particularly matters. After all this, we get an 18 power Thanos. Is that even worth it? Skip turn 5 and you can have a 20 power Infinite. If now we have a real deck building challenge, and that's what makes this card so interesting. There are plenty of ways to approach this. In fact, we have a theory crafting article if you want more information about that, but this real challenge starts now. This one is going to be the most interesting build around Marvel Snap has ever seen. Quinjet will make every stone cost 0 and have an effect. That's going to help you cycle through them as quickly as possible without having to invest the energy. Every stone will be buffed by Kazar. This could fit well into a zoo deck with the usual suspects. This could be paired with Okoye and other buff cards to try and actually use the stones and the effects to win the game regardless of Thanos. These seem to be promising ways forward, as it's aiming to use the stone to win the game, not just to make Thanos a better card. Also, lock drawing the stones back into your deck to get more stones seems like it could be very, very interesting. Funnily enough, Thanos' obsession with death brought him to the Infinity Stones in the first place, so it's only fitting that one of the best ways to use those stones is in a destroy deck. Then they're destroy fodder, and you can keep drawing through your deck to get to death and wave quickly and efficiently. Pairing this with a power stone on the board can make for a gigantic Thanos on turn 6. For all the hype and the possibility of the Infinity Stones, on a personal note, we're not sure we see a way currently this will outshine what we can already do, or how a more efficient deck with easier conditions is not at all times just going to outclass this. We're going to be trying this one as soon as we can, but I can't recommend chasing this dream early on. There are definitely possibilities, but the payoff after the possibilities is you may win like half of your games with a harder to pilot deck with a questionable payoff compared to almost any other deck. It's also a combo that needs to start from turn 1. It's simultaneously the most interesting deck building challenge yet, and we could definitely be off the mark significantly here, but when we look at the potential we see so far, some major enabler would have to be printed to lift this higher. As more strong decks and cards come along, Thanos is only likely to get worse if, without 12 card decks and 12 board slots to play into. We'll be more than happy to be wrong here, but let's see, because for now we are giving Thanos just a 3 out of 10. That's it. All the Series 5 cards come into Marvel Snap in the first release, rated on their potential alone, to give you an idea if you should pin them in your shop. Marvel Snap is a unique game, and these cards can lead to different variations of game, and at times you may just like a certain character more than others. So, as a final disclaimer, chasing the card you want with your heart instead of your head is not wrong, and we encourage you to consider that at the very least. If you think we've missed any ideas which raise or lower the bar on these cards, do let us know in the comment section down below, over on Twitter at Marvel Snap Zone, or of course you can come and join our community Discord server and chat with thousands of other Snap players. We couldn't be more excited for these cards to land in the upcoming patch. We're looking forward to seeing what balance changes may or may not come with them, and what the community does with these cards, and revisiting this article in the future to see just how wrong we were in a few weeks' time. But until then, I have been HowlingMines, you have been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Take care, have a good one.